It almost seems impossible. President Trump, in giving Iran more time, is actually delivering the most devastating strategic blow of this entire war. Because what looks on the surface like a genuine ceasefire extension, like patience, restraint, like Trump giving Iran one more chance, is in reality something far more calculated, something far more methodical, far more lethal to the regime than any bomb that has yet been dropped. When you understand what Trump is actually doing and why he's doing it, what looks like mercy actually reveals itself as a masterstroke, so staggering that when the full picture comes into focus, your jaw is going to drop. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, here to help you make sense of the madness with breaking news and analysis you're not going to get anywhere else. So you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. So yesterday, just hours before the original 2-week ceasefire was set to expire, President Trump announced an open-ended extension of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire via Truth Social, citing two primary reasons. First, he's fulfilling the personal request of Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Hashim Munir and their Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who are serving as mediators, and asked Washington to hold military action until Iran could come up with a unified proposal. And then secondly, Trump's own acknowledgement that Iran's government is, in his words, quote, seriously fractured and therefore incapable of producing a coherent negotiating position at this time. Now, critically, the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports continues in full force, and it is not part of the pause. CENTCOM confirmed 28 ships have now been turned around or returned to port since the blockade began on April 13th. Now, within hours of Trump's announcement of the extended ceasefire, Iran actually seized two vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, a Panama-flagged vessel and a Liberia-flagged vessel. Both ships were then escorted at gunpoint into Iranian territorial waters. Now, the latest is that the ceasefire, according to President Trump, is only going to last for the next few days. It's going to be temporary given how Iran continues to provoke oil tankers in the region, and Hormuz particularly. But in the end, it really doesn't matter what President Trump decides to do. That's what you have to get in all of this. As long as that boa constrictor-like blockade squeezes Iran, their already shattered economy loses nearly $500 million a day in oil revenue. And so that's why, by the way, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he's calling this phase of the war Operation Economic Fury. As President Trump has made clear, the United States Navy will continue its blockade of Iranian ports, and Scott Bessent is warning that within a matter of days, Kharg Island's oil storage is going to reach full capacity, at which point Iran's fragile oil wells will be forced to shut down entirely. And while the Treasury Department simultaneously presses forward with its economic fury campaign to systematically degrade Tehran's ability to generate, move, and repatriate funds, threatening sanctions exposure on any person or vessel facilitating covert Iranian trade and finance flows, and pledging to continue freezing the assets stolen by the regime from the Iranian people. And that's absolutely key to the entire strategy here. Starving Iran means starving the regime. This is what a lot of the critics of the war don't get, okay? This isn't so much about making life hard for the average Iranian. Unfortunately, that is part of it. But the key objective here is to starve the regime of its capacity to maintain its security machine. It prevents the RGC soldiers from getting paid. It starves the regime of its capacity to export revenue to its regional proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis. And it promotes infighting among the regime over scarce resources. And that's exactly what President Trump alluded to there, that the regime is completely fractured. There is no single coherent, comprehensive regime in place at the moment. There's only competing factions. What actually appears to be happening here is that there are three separate wars that have broken out inside Iran that have all ignited simultaneously. So you got a war between the IRGC and the civilian government. So there are reports that President Pezeshkian and their foreign minister are effectively under house arrest right now as we speak. You got a war between the military and the clerical establishment, the mullahs. Again, there are reports that the IRGC has effectively taken over and marginalized the mullahs. And of course, you've got an ongoing war between the entire regime, led now by the IRGC, and the people that it's ruled for 47 years. Now, this has been Trump's strategy all along, even before the first bomb dropped. It's known as a classic double squeeze. So the regime has been strained both internally and externally for months now. So internally, originally months ago, by Trump's statements of solidarity with the people when they were rising up in Iran in January, saying that he was with them and would protect them in their rising up against the regime. And then externally, in terms of U.S. forces amassing around Iran. And now the regime, as a result of the full force of that double squeeze, the regime is indeed cracking up with zero off-ramps, by the way. So at one level, in the first war between the IRGC and the more moderate elected wing of Iran's government, the IRGC is deliberately thwarting the moderates in their ability to negotiate with the Trump administration, because by doing so, they end up destroying the ideological legitimacy of the IRGC. We talked about this a lot lately, which is the theology, the inherent Shiite theology that they've been ordained by God to destroy the great Satan. And so surrendering to the great Satan, in effect, involves the surrendering of the legitimacy of that ideology. So war number one is the IRGC versus what remains of the civilian government. And it's no longer subtle. They're doing everything, IRGC is doing everything they possibly can to protect their legitimacy. So President Masoud Pezeshkian, the elected president of Iran, he's basically been systematically stripped of authority from the inside. A foreign minister, Araghchi, has been sidelined. So the IRGC is doing everything they can to basically maintain the legitimacy of their ideology, that they've been ordained by God to destroy the great Satan, not to negotiate with him. War number two is between the clergy and the IRGC. And this one cuts to the very soul of what the Islamic Republic was always supposed to be. The mullahs built the state, right? The revolution in 1979 was their revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini and all. The concept of rule by the supreme Islamic jurist, a council of Islamic experts. That was their theological invention, basically a Supreme Court made up of mullahs. But now, for the first time, the IRGC is running Iran without them. And the mullahs have realized something terrifying. If the Islamic regime can persist without Islamic clerical leadership, then the Islamic part of the equation was always window dressing. And what they're watching unfold in real time is the conversion of a theocracy into a bona fide military dictatorship. Not gradually, not theoretically, but now visibly in front of them, and they can't stop it. But if those two wars seem bad enough, nothing ultimately compares to war number three. This is the one that may indeed be the most decisive. But first, I need you all to go right now to turleytalkscrypto.com. That's turleytalkscrypto.com. I want to tell you about something that I think is incredibly important, especially given everything we're watching happen in this economy right now. You know what I talk about every single day, right? The system that was supposed to protect everyday Americans is showing its cracks. Your groceries cost more. Your 401k is bouncing around. I mean, I've been asking myself harder questions about my own financial future, and I think you should be too. Here's what the globalist financial establishment does not want you to understand. You don't have to keep your entire retirement in their system. That's why I want to tell you about Block Trust IRA and why I think it matters right now more than ever. Block Trust IRA lets you add Bitcoin and crypto to a tax-advantaged retirement account, the same IRA structure you already rely on. And look, you don't need to understand crypto. That's the entire point. Think of it like having a professional portfolio manager handling the strategy for you. Unlike Wall Street, Block Trust IRA only profits when you profit, period. Your assets are held in institutional cold storage, insured, protected. It's yours. This is financial sovereignty, gang. And given everything happening in the economy right now, there is no better time to start asking harder questions about your retirement. Right now, when you open up your account at turleytalkscrypto.com, you can receive up to $2,500 in bonus crypto to get started. turleytalkscrypto.com. If you've been watching this channel, you already know the world is changing. This is where you start changing with it. Click on that link below right now. War number 3 is in the streets, and this is where things become something entirely different, because the people filling the streets of Tehran, Isfahan, Mashhad, and over 200 cities across all 31 provinces of Iran are not the regime's foreign enemies. They are fellow citizens, and they have had it with the regime, and for good reason. Power cuts in Tehran now last up to 12 hours a day. Food prices have risen more than 40%. Hospitals are reporting medicine shortages. Cancer treatments have been suspended. And President Pezeshkian reportedly told IRGC commanders directly that if a ceasefire is not reached, the economy will completely collapse within 3 to 4 weeks. But here's the moment that should send a chill down the spine of every mullah still left in Tehran. In city after city, in squares and intersections across the country, people begun chanting for the return of the Shah. Not quietly, not in isolated corners, but openly. Because the entire founding mythology of the Islamic Republic, the entire reason this regime exists, was built on the destruction of the Shah's monarchy. And if 47 years later Iranians are publicly saying they want back what was overthrown, the revolution's legitimacy has not just weakened, it is completely inverted. And so look at what Trump has engineered with methodical, almost surgical precision. He destroyed Iran's air defenses. He destroyed its nuclear infrastructure. He destroyed its missile arsenal. We're talking a $500 billion, 50-year investment wiped out in the opening weeks of Operation Epic Fury. And then, when talking produced nothing but IRGC stall tactics and Islamabad theatrics, Trump implemented the naval blockade, which, as we covered the other day, has now shown it has real teeth. We're talking disabling fire, marine boarding parties, seized vessels. And that blockade is costing Iran an estimated $435 million per day in lost revenue against an inflation rate that was already running above 50% before the conflict began. And so this Trumpian trap is perfect. And it's a 3-door trap with no good door. If the IRGC fight, if they send missile storm tankers, resume attacks on U.S. forces, Trump takes out their bridges, he takes out their power plants, whatever remains of their military infrastructure. If they surrender and accept Trump's terms, the IRGC's ideological credibility implodes overnight. The great Satan has decisively won. And if they just continue to stall, if they play the long game, they lose $435 million every single day, and their already tattered economy collapses. Every road leads to the same destination, every single one. And that's the collapse of the regime. And so, with the internal shattering of the regime happening in these 3 different civil wars, as it were, and then with the external squeeze happening with their entire military infrastructure falling apart and their economy collapsing, I think Victor Davis Hanson's absolutely right. He sees the regime in the same position as the Japanese in 1945, when MacArthur handed the Japanese their terms of surrender back in September of that year in Tokyo Bay. In the end, Japan just didn't have choices anymore. They didn't get to negotiate. They didn't get to barter. They looked around at what was left of their empire, and they surrendered unconditionally. And Hanson argues with complete conviction that Iran is in precisely that position right now. The key to understand what Trump is doing is that we're not negotiating, we're dictating. So this is why the IRGC simply can't comply. To do so would be suicide, and they'd rather do suicide on their own terms. And keep in mind, the suicide is not for the moderates, but it is for the mullahs, and it is for the military. As far as the mullahs and military are concerned, it's over. Surrender means it's over. So in the meantime, Trump just patiently waits as the regime collapses both externally and internally. And there is literally nothing, absolutely nothing they can do about it.